It is my sincere wish and hope that the day will come when the protecting arms of universal safety will spread out over all industry and reach the millions of workers who make industry possible. Charles Schwab. On March 25, 1911, a tragic fire at the Triangle Waste Company garment factory killed 146 and injured 71, mainly young Jewish and Italian immigrant women, on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. This event would light a spark that brought political and social change in America, acting as a catalyst for the progressive era. However, there are still lessons to be learned from the incident. The 20th century was a time of change. Though a century earlier the Industrial Revolution had occurred, it would take us to the late 19th century for American life to industrialize. New machinery and technology, the creation of Taylorism, railroads, and political backing facilitated mass production and exportation. This economic surge spurred the emergence of new industries, attracting immigrants seeking prosperity and fueling urbanization to accommodate them. This explosion of the economy would bring America out of its shell and into the world's view. However, alongside these advancements came numerous challenges. Factory work stripped individuals of autonomy and power, exacerbating inequality as wealth concentrated at the top while workers endured perilous conditions, meager wages, and grueling hours. Society became split between rich and poor, with two-faced cities being the standard. But people would not stand for this. Strikes and protests would become abundant from a wide variety of backgrounds. One of these protests would occur in the Big Apple. In 1900, entrepreneurs Max Planck and Isaac Harris established the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. 2 years later, it was relocated to the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the Ash Building in Greenwich Village, where many other garment companies also moved there due to the promise of fire safety, a prevalent industry concern, and the ample space, 100 by 100 square feet. Its 500 workers would produce over 1,003 shirtwaists a day, a type of blouse popular with office working women during a boom in the fashion industry. It topped $1 million in annual sales, but this success was tainted. The workers endured 12-hour days with wages ranging from $3 to $6, facing terrible, unsanitary, cramped, and hazardous conditions. On top of that, the owners locked the factory doors to prevent workers from taking unauthorized breaks or stealing, and those who spoke out faced physical harm by hired thugs. A year before the tragedy, garment workers numbering 20,000 struck for better conditions and unions in what was dubbed the Uprising of the 20,000. But changing their ways was much too expensive for the greedy owners, so they had the police break it up. Despite police intervention, the workers persisted, resulting in improved conditions and higher wages for 15,000 workers. However, the owners never fully complied and continue implementing inhumane conditions. How idiotic this would be. It was a cold spring Saturday on the 8th floor. Hundreds of workers lined up next to each other, tirelessly sewing. There was barely any room to breathe, but just enough to work. Scraps were thrown onto the floors or into bins, which was a pigsty. The owners were gone and locked the exits. It appeared that nothing would happen that day. It was near closing time, approximately 4:40 p.m., and everyone was ready to leave. The long week was finally over, but tragedy would strike. It is not entirely known what the cause was, the most common acceptance being a lit cigarette thrown into some sheets of scrap. What occurred then was horrific. A blazing ember grew, and workers screamed in panic. More and more cloth burnt brightly. Workers attempted pitifully to put out the fire, but it was to no avail. Dinah Lifshitz would call the 10th floor on a telephone and warn that as a blazing inferno grew around her. However, there was no contact with the 9th. Panic struck 2 floors above them. Many rushed out of the building, commonly on the roof where they would survive by jumping onto the adjoining buildings. Back on the 8th, one of the doors was unlocked. Swarms of people would attempt to escape through it, but the fire grew and blocked it off shortly after. Others would utilize the 2 elevators, which were successful at the time. Then the 9th realized what was happening. They could see the outline of the fire creeping up. Both floors, mainly the 9th, would try anything to escape. The 9th floor had one of their staircases locked, probably due to theft concerns, and the other would be engulfed in flames. One such idea was to escape by going up the stairs, which mimicked the success of what those on the 10th did. Another idea was using an antiquated ladder, which broke upon impact. Others crowded into elevators, and the fire escaped. The latter would collapse over the weight and heat, and the former, not long after, broke due to the heat warping the rails and people jumping onto the elevator cars. With seemingly no viable escape route, many considered jumping, but witnessing the fate of others made some hesitate. Firefighters had arrived, attempting to assist with ladders, but they would only reach the 6th floor. There truly was only one option. Some prayed or sought comfort in each other, but the advancing flames forced them to jump. Within 30 minutes, it was all over. An hour and a half later, the firefighters entered only to find charred dead bodies. Onlookers called it a nightmare, with images of death scarring their minds. It was a tragedy never before seen by the nation. The people cried in outrage, questioning how something like this occurred. 2 days later, the police investigated the scene and concluded that the factory had been poorly managed and maintained, and thus the owner should be persecuted. Details such as one fire exit, locked doors, and faulty elevators made it appear that profits had been put before safety. Months later, on December 4th, 1911, the owners faced trial on 7 counts of manslaughter. However, the case was mainly over whether or not the doors were locked, a violation of Article 6, Section 80 of New York Labor's Law, which states, "All doors leading in or to any such factory shall be so constructed as to open outwardly where practicable, and shall not be locked, bolted, or fastened during working hours." Sadly, the jury concluded not guilty due to insufficient evidence. 3 years later, Blank and Harris would settle several civil lawsuits, providing the victims around $75 each. Despite this, the movement for change persisted. Issues like these were common. However, something of this magnitude and notoriety had never truly occurred before. This was a fact that was well known at the time, as one Martha Bensley Brewer states, "Every year, there are 50,000 working men and women killed in the United States, 136 a day." And Rose Schneiderman declared, "This is not the first time girls have been burnt alive in the city. Every week I must learn of the untimely death of one of my sister workers. Every year thousands of us are maimed." These were women who had enough of the cruelty being forced upon them, and there were thousands of these like-minded women. On April 2nd, a mass meeting would be held at the Metropolitan Opera House. At the said meeting, Dr. Henry Moskowitz stated that in the New York City, 12,000 factories with these conditions were found. Factories without fire escapes, 14. Factories with defectively placed ladders, 63. With no other exits and fire escapes, 491. With doors opening in, 1,173. With doors locked during the day, 23. With halls less than 36 inches wide, 60. With stairways dark, 58. With defective steps, treads, and handrails, 51. With obstructed fire escapes, 78. Having fire drills, 1. Everyone agreed that something had to be done. Protests erupted, with a reported 350,000 crowd participating in the funeral march. Various groups such as the Executive Board of the Ladies' Waist and Dressmakers Union, the ILGWU, the Women's Trade Union League, the Workmen's Circle, the American Red Cross, and many more would work to improve conditions using predominantly collective bargaining. In response to public outcry, New York enacted the Sullivan-Hoey Fire Prevention Law in October of that year, mandating factory owners to install sprinkler systems, established the New York City Fire Prevention Bureau, and expanded the powers of the fire commissioner, along with other laws regulating fire safety, factory inspection, sanitation, and employment rules for women and children. But this wasn't enough. Muckrakers would bring the issue into the lives of all Americans, causing the entire nation and the world to know about the fire and how the workers were being treated. Another 25 laws would be passed in New York, along with a factory investigating commission, and later under federal law during the New Deal. Furthermore, decades later in 1970, the Occupational Safety and Health Act was passed, and a year later, OSHA was formed, further ensuring the safety of workers even more. These collective efforts ushered in positive change for America, introducing enhanced fire precautions, higher sanitation, improved work hours, and child labor laws in New York and later across all other states. Unions grew significantly, with in fact 3 million more union members in 1920 compared to just a year before the tragedy. New organizations emerged to enforce these changes, but were hindered by political corruption. Business owners were bribing politicians, fearing profit loss. That is why today, safety is still a crucial topic, evidenced by thousands of OSHA violations in 2022. But this should not discredit the movement. Despite ongoing challenges, the Triangle Fire acted as a catalyst, initiating a chain reaction of improvements in safety and workers', women's, and immigrants' rights. 30 minutes impacted millions of lives. The tragic fire on March 25, 1911 at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory would end the lives of 146, but save even more. This tragedy portrayed the necessity of safety in the workplace and forced precautions to be taken by all companies. New legislation on safety, working conditions, and workers' rights would be accomplished through the fury of protests following the tragedy.